floor today to discuss an amendment that I filed to the pending legislation. It's an amendment to modify the Jones Act. The Jones Act is an archaic 1920s era law that hinders free trade, stifles the economy, and hurts consumers, largely for the benefit of labor unions. Specifically, this amendment would effectively repeal a law that prevents U.S. shippers from purchasing or otherwise affordably procuring the services of vessels that are built outside the United States for use in American waters. From time to time here in Congress, we find that legislation still remains on the books many decades after it has served its original stated purpose. If ever had one, I think one of the best examples of this is a law called the Jones Act. As many of you know, the Jones Act is simply a continuation of laws passed through U.S. history addressing cabotage or port-to-port coastal shipping. Those laws have been used to protect U.S. domestic shipping, dating back to the very first session of Congress. The Jones Act may have had some rationale back in the 1920s when it was enacted, but today it serves only to raise shipping costs, making U.S. farmers and businesses less competitive in the global marketplace and increasing costs for American consumers. According to the 2002 U.S. International Trade Commission economic study, by the way, the U.S. International Trade Commission is not a group of special interests. They're an international trade commission which is appointed to study issues affecting international trade, obviously, as the name implies. Their study reached the conclusion that repealing the Jones Act would lower shipping costs by about 22%. The commission found that repealing the Jones Act would have an annual positive welfare effect of $656 million on the U.S. economy. Since these decade-old studies are the most recent statistics available, imagine the impact the Jones Act repeal would have today. Far more than $656 million annual positive impact, likely closer to $1 billion, stimulating our economy in the midst of an anemic recovery. The requirement that U.S. shippers must purchase vessels in the United States comes at a tremendous cost that is passed on to U.S. consumers. For example, just recently, the U.S. container line McCAIN placed a $418 million order for two 3,620-foot equivalent unit container ship in a U.S. shipyard. The high price of $209 million per vessel reflects that the ships will be carrying goods within the U.S. and therefore governed by the protectionist Jones Act. The fact is that McCAIN's order at $209 million per ship is more than 5 times more expensive than if those same ships were procured outside the United States. Ships of that size built outside the United States would cost closer to $40 million each. For comparison, even Maersk Line's far larger ships cost millions less at an average of $185 million each. The U.S. Maritime Administration, MARAD, has found that the cost to operate U.S. flag vessels at $22,000 a day is about 2.7 times higher than foreign flag vessels, just $6,000 a day. There's no doubt that these inflated costs are eventually passed on to shipping consumers. To shipping customers. In the energy sector, for example, the price for moving crude oil from the Gulf Coast to the northeastern United States on Jones Act tankers is $5 to $6 more per barrel, while moving it to eastern Canada is about $2. That can mean an additional $1 million per tanker in shipping costs for oil producers. This increased cost is why, according to the Congressional Research Service, more than twice as much Gulf Coast crude oil was shipped by water to Canada as was shipped to northeastern U.S. refineries over the last year, all in an effort to avoid paying Jones Act vessel shipping rates. The implications of this fact touches just about every American who buys gasoline. It's American consumers who pay exorbitantly higher prices because of a law that protects the shipbuilding industry and domestically manufactured ships that transport crude and other refined products. But it's not just the energy sector that deals with the distorted effects of the Jones Act. Cattlemen in Hawaii that want to bring their cattle to the U.S. mainland market, for example, have actually resorted to flying the cattle on 747 jumbo jets to work around the restrictions of the Jones Act. Their only alternative is to ship the cattle to Canada because all livestock carriers in the world are foreign-owned. I'm concerned about the impact of any barrier to free trade. I believe the United States trade barriers invite other countries to put up or retain their own barriers, and that at the end of the day, the U.S. consumer and the economy at large pays the price. Throughout my career, I've always been a strong supporter of free trade. Opening markets to the free flow of goods and services benefits America and benefits our trading partners. Trade liberalization creates jobs, expands economic growth, and provides consumers with access to lower-cost goods and services. And yet, as clear as the benefits of free trade are, actually taking action to remove trade barriers and open markets can be almost impossible here in Congress. Special interests that have long and richly benefited from protectionism flex their muscles and issue doomsday warnings about the consequences of moving forward on free trade. And judging from the hysterical reaction by some of the special interests to my simple filing this amendment, the debate over the Jones Act will be no different. The domestic shipbuilding requirement of the Jones Act is outdated and should be abolished. U.S. consumers are free to buy a foreign-built car. U.S. trucking companies are free to buy a foreign-built truck. U.S. railroads are free to buy a foreign-built locomotive. U.S. airlines are free to buy a foreign-built airplane. Why can't United States maritime commercial interests more affordably ship goods on foreign-made vessels? Why do U.S. consumers, particularly those in Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico, need to pay for ships that are 5 times more expensive? If there was a law that long ago outlived its usefulness, if it ever had any, it's the Jones Act. On the Jones Act, it's time to change course today. I have a letter I would like included in the record from the American Farm Bureau Federation, which states, Farm Bureau believes that there should be no restrictions as to the quantities or vessels on which a commodity is shipped between U.S. ports. Repealing the Jones Act would allow more competition for the movement of goods between U.S. ports, thus driving down transportation costs. I continue reading from the letter to all members of the Senate from the Farm Bureau. Repeal of the Jones Act accomplishes the same purpose: a reduction in energy costs, increased competition to lower costs of U.S. goods, and more opportunities to transport agricultural commodities at competitive prices. Due to this importance, Farm Bureau policy developed by our grassroots members, consisting of working farmers and ranchers, explicitly supports the repeal of the Jones Act. Farm Bureau urges you to vote in support of Senator McCain's amendment repealing sections of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. Then there's an article which states that McCAIN under fire, a growing number of politicians are taking aim at a prominent U.S. senator's crusade against the Jones Act. Oh my God, I am deeply concerned. All the special interests on this issue are weighing in. And by the way, one of them would have effects on the U.S. shipbuilding and repair base. And we all know that the U.S. shipbuilding industry, because of the Jones Act, is moribund. In fact, if I'd have asked the article from the Daily Signal, which says, shipbuilding industry struck on ground. U.S. shipbuilding exports are tiny compared to exports of semis and trailers. Shipbuilding is subject to the protectionist Jones Act, which hinders competition, while the semi-industry is not. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, The coastwise laws, like the Jones Act, are highly protectionist provisions that are intended to create a coastwise monopoly in order to protect and develop American merchant marine shipbuilding, etc. But protecting U.S. industries from competitions may actually have the opposite effect. Consider U.S. production of vessels designed to transport goods via water compared to U.S. production of semi-trailer trucks and trailers designed to transport goods via land. In 2013, U.S. manufacturers exported $4.1 billion in semi-trailer trucks and trailers, but they exported just $0.1 billion in commercial ships. Americans in most states would benefit from the freedom to ship goods on the best-built, most affordable vessels wherever they are made. The Alaska governor is actually required to, quote, use best efforts and all appropriate means to persuade the United States Congress to repeal those provisions of the Jones Act, formerly codified as 46 U.S.C. 861, etc. The Jones Act drives up the price of gas, hinders U.S. infrastructure improvements, inflicts high costs on people in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, and makes it difficult to transship goods between U.S. ports. So the facts are clear, Madam President. What we have is an old-time, back 1920s law that may have been, I emphasize the word may, have been had some utility in the past. And, Madam President, I am aware that all of the special interests have been mobilized and how this can be damaging to, frankly, to certain special interests. It would not be damaging to the average citizen who would pay less for the goods that are transported much more cheaply as a result of the Jones Act repeal. So I say to those critics of this amendment, as has been my habit over the years, I won't quit on this issue. There'll be other opportunities to put the United States Senate and Congress on record, and sooner or later, the Farm Bureau will be heard. Sooner or later, the people of Hawaii and Puerto Rico who are paying exorbitant prices that they shouldn't have to pay will be heard. Sooner or later, this protectionist and anachronism, ancient protectionist act will be repealed, and average American consumers will benefit from it, and unfortunately, the special interests will not. Madam President, I yield the floor.